Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me as a guest lecturer at your Introduction to Management course at FGV in Brazil. And particularly, I'm very grateful to Umesh, your professor, whom I actually coincidentally met in Brazil, I think in 2012, almost 10 years ago at the Rio Plus 20 conference. I don't think neither one of us had been to Brazil before, at least I hadn't been. I don't think Umesh was living and working in Brazil. So it's a very interesting coincidence that now we are actually making this connection here for FGB in Brazil. My name is Oliver Laasch. I'm the author of a textbook called Principles of Management, Practicing Ethics, Responsibility, and Sustainability. And Umesh was asking me to talk a little bit about the people management chapter of the book. The book itself has been written for exactly that type of introduction to management courses that you're sitting in right now. So this is something that's probably to be expected, but something that you might not expect is actually that it takes a very progressive angle on the topic of management. So we're trying to see how can we actually integrate topics of sustainability, of responsibility, and of ethics into management as it is normally done. So not to separate it out as you do it in CSR or corporate sustainability or in the business ethics department, but actually to see how can we manage normal managerial activities, practices, how can we manage ethically, responsibly, and sustainability. This is the idea. And this is the chapter we're going to talk about a little bit, people management. Usually, if you are in a normal book, typically you see a chapter called HR management. But on purpose, actually, I'm not mentioning the word HR or human resources in this chapter. And a little bit later, we'll talk a little bit more about why that actually is. I understand that you already have had a lecture together with Umesh and the other professors on the topic of people management more theoretically, providing general frames, tools, concept. So what I will do is actually to look at the different cases that we might find interesting from around the world to see how we can manage or do people management ethically, responsibly, and sustainably. And one of those cases will be the one of Grayston Bakery, which you have just seen. So overall, just to give us a kind of overview to work from. So it's a very, very broad topic. So we have things in there like employee development, trade unions, offboarding of employees, well, then also onboarding, of course, employee dialogue, employee communication or internal communication of the company, employee volunteering, attracting candidates, also how topics of employment actually relate to ownership and shareholders of companies. So it's a very, very broad and important topic, but we will focus on one thing that I typically try to do when I'm thinking about managerial practices, to think about the main areas of practice, and we'll get there in just a moment. But what are the learning goals from that I am thinking about when, or that I thought about when I was writing the chapter together with my two co-authors? So this was to get to know those 5 main areas of the people management process, those different areas of practice I just mentioned. Looking at main tools of responsible people management, then thinking about how can we actually do people management ethically, responsibly, and sustainably, while we just do the normal things you do in that part of the managerial function. And of course, we're trying to understand the role of responsible management in this process. And interesting actually is that there seems to be a natural match, a natural combination of those two topics of people management and responsibility topics. For instance, and a related encouraging fact is that when choosing an employer, and that's already a couple of years ago, so the number's probably bigger by now, but over 2/3, 68% of students actually do consider a company's social and environmental reputation as more important than a salary. So it looks like graduates like you will be soon, or if you have been in education before, as you have been, are more and more inclined to think more frequently about, or more importantly about, is it a good place I will be working in, or is the place that pays me the most money? Ideally, obviously, there will be some kind of balance between those two factors. But it looks like the majority of people entering a job find the good company aspect actually more important. So that's interesting because it creates a role for people management to make that connection. And I promised you this case about Grayston Bakery, and this is a fascinating case on how a very mature type of managerial function or managerial mode like that of people management can be very, very innovative. So Grayston Bakery actually is somebody or the people at Grayston Bakery, the managers at Grayston Bakery and the original founder, they actually reinvented one part of the employee management or people management process, which is the hiring part. So they do a practice called open hiring. And open hiring is very different from how you usually do hiring. Usually you would, of course, have a CV and you have a stack of paper or of documents if you're in the digital age on your computer, and you sift through them. You're trying to find the perfect person for the job, the person who actually can do the job best and who brings most value, typically financial value, to your company from what they're able to do. So this is not what they do here. So how can you do it differently then? What Grayston Bakery does is actually to do it the opposite way around. Their slogan is also, we're not hiring people to bake brownies. They're saying we're baking brownies to hire people. So the idea is that the whole organization, the company, is actually there to give people jobs. And this also means that how you get people in there must be based on different criteria. So they actually give a job to anybody who puts their name on a list. They do not check the CV, they do not check previous references, they don't do any of that, but they're giving people a job just based on their willingness to work. And then that makes them assume that, well, those people will be the ones who actually really do need a job, because those are the people who, based on their paperwork, are probably not able to get a job elsewhere. So this is what they call open hiring. So a very radical innovation of the hiring practice. And they're actually teaching companies around the world at the moment how to do that practice themselves. Very interesting practice in the people management context. And so interestingly, so here I'm quoting this exactly from the author. So they're saying human resource development, so they say human resources, is increasingly expected to play a facilitative role in CSR, sustainability, and ethics. So the three things that we want to integrate into the managerial process. However, and there comes the caveat, it is criticized for moving away from its mission to advocate humanistic values in organizations, to totally embracing short-term business agenda. And this is exactly the reason for why I do not talk about human resources management, because if you make human beings a resource, a resource for production, a resource for a short-term business agenda, to use their words here, automatically you're instrumentalizing human beings, while human resources, respectively people management, actually used to be very much about the well-being of human beings as well. And the idea is actually to bring this a little bit back. And this is also what then becomes central in the definition of the topic. So it is about practices dealing with the management of and management for people employed by an organization. So this is very, very important. And overall, this then plays out through the entire people management process. So the set of different practices people managers do, and that together makes this process of people management from the point in time somebody is recruited into an organization to the point in time where they're actually leaving the organization. And what we will do is to quickly go through those different areas and have a look at a couple of very interesting disruptive examples, just as the one from Grayston Bakery, which you have seen just now. And you see at the very core here, there's something that we call the people management, responsible management symbiosis, because those topics, they do help each other out. And we will see how just in a little moment. So first of all, let's look at recruitment. And you already have had an example of recruitment in the case of Grayston Bakery, but here's another one from a different corner of the world. So very interestingly, I wasn't aware of that before I saw that case, that actually there's discrimination in certain jobs, in certain positions. In this case, the position of working in a Japanese sushi restaurant, and particularly if you are a sushi chef, that women, for all kinds of not quite rationally justified reasons are said to be not good for the job. So there's a certain stigma put on women, which keeps them from working in this particular type of role. So here we've got one interesting organization that at the restaurant Nadeshiko, which does exactly the opposite. So they're exclusively hiring women. And by doing so, not only that they do give a couple of women a job where they wouldn't have gotten one, but also they're actually proving the stigma wrong, because they're a thriving business, which does exactly what the rest of that type of business tells you not to do. So there's immense potential for innovation in people management. If we are thinking about the societal, environmental, and the ethical aspects of that kind of management. So then the next area of practice is training and development. And one of my favorite cases is actually that of GoodArk. GoodArk is a semiconductor company based out of Suzhou in Zhejiang in China, province of China that's very close to Shanghai. And they actually do something, once again, that everybody would tell you not to do in that kind of industry, where it's about production, manufacturing, having high output with minimum human resource, respectively resources input, and achieving highest quality levels by really focusing on getting the job of manufacturing done. They actually spend very considerable amounts of time in employee education. And on purpose, I'm not saying employee training, because typically employee training is understood as training for the job. So that would actually increase your effectiveness, your efficiency as an employee in very explicit ways. So how do you produce more quickly? How do you reduce failure rates? Typically Six Sigma, for instance, is one type of training where you're doing exactly this. No, this is actually educating people in the old Chinese wisdom transitions, including Confucianism and Taoism. So how on earth is this related to the semiconductor business? And the point there is, immediately it isn't. We know now that there's many kind of medium and long run effects that actually help the business as well. But the original motivation was actually to address an employee well-being issue, to help employee to reground themselves in those ancient Chinese teachings, which are very much life lessons, helping them to develop as human beings outside the job, and to some degree also inside the job. So very interesting, once again, and something you probably wouldn't have expected. And then the next area is performance management. Performance management is about whatever you do with people. So whatever comes out of your relationship, the relationship that you manage in people management. And typically would think about what we said before, pieces produced, quality levels, maybe a little bit later after that, the profit generated from it, or employee productivity, as we typically call it. But there's also a set of alternative performance management measures. So for instance, employee job satisfaction. And that doesn't necessarily have to be in the instrumental way, because originally job satisfaction came out of the idea that if people are more satisfied, they work better, they stay longer with us as a company, you don't have to retrain new people and so on. But this is actually the idea that job satisfaction could be a managerial people management metric, a type of performance by its own right, not something you do for something else. Effectiveness in recruitment is another interesting one, but also the one that I find very interesting is employee competence building. So competence is typically wider than just your ability to do this particular job. And this is a long-standing discussion in the people management literature and research as well. How do companies and management in companies actually balance out training people for the job, which makes them more valuable in economic terms for the company, versus training, educating people more widely, which makes them more valuable for any other job. So if you're actually building wider competence, what happens is people, according to the theory, are more likely to leave because they're more competent to go somewhere else. Still, that kind of competence building has become something that is increasingly front and center to human development efforts in people management. And one interesting example, because it's a very extreme one, once again, is the company Ericsson, a telecommunications company, which appears to have found that balance in a very impressive way. They do something called skill-based volunteering. So they're actually helping people to at the same time use the skills they have on their job already. So they are a telecommunications company. Here they are setting up telecommunication infrastructure in a crisis region, but the crisis region would be out of the picture usually. So that kind of personal development that you get from, and personal satisfaction, I imagine as well, that you get from going somewhere and really helping and doing things somewhere on the ground, where otherwise you would have been sitting in your office, getting to know people who directly benefit from what you're doing. That kind of personal wider development is exactly what typically doesn't directly help you to do your own job very narrowly better, but builds you, gives you a greater competence as a person. So very interesting example, that one. And then the next one is employee compensation. And remuneration here doesn't necessarily have to be only financial remuneration. It is anything that you get out of your job. So also the job satisfaction that we had before already is some type of remuneration. That's also part of the secret behind why people more and more want to work in more responsible, more sustainable, more ethical companies, because it makes them feel better. They get something out of it, which pays them back for sometimes not being paid as much as in the most irresponsible company. So for instance, petroleum and tobacco industry companies' jobs are traditionally some of the highest paid ones for some reason, because they have to pay out the negative job satisfaction that many people get out of working in a stigmatized industry or company by paying more financially. Good, but here's a very different example. Gravity payments, very, very interesting. So Dan Price here, he took a very extreme step after talking to one of his employees, who I understand also used to be his former partner in life, and understanding how she actually was struggling to keep up with what she was earning, because she wasn't actually earning the amount of money that somebody typically would need in order to stop worrying about money and just to be happy. So then he thought, okay, well, I'm the CEO of that company. I'm also the majority owner of that company, if I remember that correctly. So I could actually pay people whatever I want, as long as I don't let the company go broke meanwhile. So what he did was actually to announce that everybody in the company would earn at least $70,000 every year. And not only that, but also that he reduced his own pay by a couple of $100,000 to only $70,000 a year. So imagine that, that's quite a dramatic step. But if you look at the videos online, for instance, how the company is working now, and what that also did for the relationship between him and the people working there, for instance, because he would only he would always come to work with his old car. They actually all chipped in and together bought him a new car at some point in time. So very interesting dynamics all of a sudden that you wouldn't even think of otherwise. So very interesting one once again. Employee relations practices. That's the last area that we said we would talk about. And after we do that, I also want to quickly highlight just one example from Brazil itself, which is one of my favorites. So people management at Everlane. Everlane is a clothing company, which I actually have featured as a very positive case in the book as well, because they are very radical in pricing practices. So they show exactly how much is being spent in the supply chain, and they show for every individual product in the store how much their margin actually is, which is an attack on that kind of intransparency in the clothing industry very often, which leads to other bad consequences. But this is not what this case is about. This is actually the exact opposite, them apparently being quite irresponsible, at least judging from the facts here. So Everlane actually laid off 2/3 of their customer experience team during the COVID crisis, days after they asked for union recognition. So we can only assume that this is what happened, but one very irresponsible practice that we see very often is something called union busting, because if you introduce a labor union, you strengthen the employee's position in bargaining situations considerably, and it becomes more difficult for the employer to get away with whatever they want to do, reducing wages, getting rid of benefits, inhumane working hours if they wanted to. So We don't know if this is really what happened here, but the evidence here makes it something that is not very far-fetched. So once again, a very good example of a practice in that area, but an irresponsible practice if you think about union busting more generally. And I promised you one example from Brazil. So and probably you're all aware of that, the Semco corporation. So Ricardo Semler's company, which became very notoriously famous in a good way end of the 1990s, because they were one of the first companies in the world to very drastically reduce hierarchies and give responsibility back to employees, and breaking down boundaries between departments, giving employees freedoms to decide about budgets and so on. So very interesting also, because this is an example of how people management can actually spill over in the entire managerial infrastructure of a company, because doing that to begin with requires very, very drastic changes in people management, different contracts, hiring a different type of person, probably thinking about not only about the responsibilities, but also about the legal implications of people now taking very wider decisions. Training people to actually be able to take up that responsibility. So very, very interesting example of how the management of an entire organization can be facilitated, the more responsible management of an entire organization can be facilitated by more sophisticated people management in this case. Good. So just to very quickly run you through what we've done once again. So we talked about people management and how to do that responsibly. We have said that there's a certain symbiosis between them. They help each other out. And then the relationship that we have there actually runs through all of those different areas of people management. We talked about recruitment. We talked about training and development, about performance management, compensation and benefits, and also about employee relations. So this is us done for now, but I would like to quickly, in case you're interested, highlight some other resources along those lines that we have in the same chapter. So if you want to see how you actually do those things hands-on, have a look at the practitioner professional profile of Erica Guzman, who's the head of human resources of a packaging company in Mexico. Very, very hands-on, interesting insights. Or have a look at that true story, which shows how internship, another part of human resources management, people management, can go very, very wrong. And this one's anonymized because there are a couple of juicy but not too positive facts in there. And then also, if you want to put yourself into the shoes of different employees and you want to analyze a practice in people management, use this worksheet. There's some more instruction in the chapter as well, which I think you will find very interesting there. So if you want to do that, have a look at the book. It's chapter 17, and I'm very, very much looking forward to meeting you in your session as well, and have that kind of 25-30 minutes of discussion. So think about good questions that you could ask in order to prime our discussion, to get the discussion going. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.